Hello, you guys. This is Cast, and this will be my 7 round Jaguars draft video. Sorry if I seem a little tired. This is an late upload, but I wanted to keep the consistency going with going 32 days in a row, 7 round for each team in order of what their first round draft selection is. But without further ado, let's start the draft. Now, as you can already see, I have the draft up, but we are gonna go and we're gonna look at the Jaguars depth chart, kind of post free agency. They obviously got rid of a good amount of players, but it's like looking here, they have Diami Brown, Parker Washington, Gabe Davis, and then it's like Brian Thomas Jr. I do not know who Joshua Cephas is, or Austin Trammell, or David White Jr. Obviously, this was a team that had a hard time protecting their quarterback. Obviously, Trevor Lawrence, we all know that he went out with a concussion, at the end of last year off of a very vicious hit. And obviously, looking at Mac Jones, he just didn't live up to the expectation. So looking at this, it's like we have Walker Little, Ezra Cleveland, who is a pretty decent guard, in my opinion. But then they signed Robert Hainsey from Tampa Bay, a backup, Patrick McCarry from Baltimore, and then they have Anton Harrison. They obviously traded their tackle, they traded their tackle last season when it seemingly looked like they weren't going to do anything, and they wanted to get something for him, to the Vikings. So now you kind of have this bootleg offensive line. And as we all know, Trevor Lawrence got pretty beat up last year. Something that I look at this team is that, like, you have, a few solid weapons. I think Tank Bigsby is a good back. Travis Etienne hasn't really found his stride, in my opinion. Brian Thomas Jr. obviously can be a very, very good wide receiver in the league. His speed and even route running ability when he was kind of considered only a speedster, kind of emerged in the NFL once he was in an NFL offense. But moving to the defensive side, as we all know, Trayvon Walker, Josh Hines Allen are their premier edge rushers. Didn't do as well as I thought they should have last year. I think the pass rush is very stagnant for the most part. And then it's like you look on the interior of Mason Smith, Devon Hamilton. Devon Hamilton being a younger player. Mason Smith, I can't really say too much about him. It's strange to me that I guess our lads is having Eric Armstead be a backup. I fully expect him to be the starter, to be honest with you. Maybe they moved Mason Smith back, but overall, I think this is a D line that underperformed last year. And then looking at the linebackers, we have Devin Lloyd, Aloakun, and Jones. I think Jones is their weak point on there. And then you look at, or sorry, I guess they're listing them. No, they're listing them in nickel, I guess, on this. So it's like only two linebackers. And the left side corner is Jones. Safety is Eric Murray, who they signed through Houston. Darnell Savage, a former Green Bay Packer. Tyson Campbell, who's I think a decent, cornerback. And then they also signed Jordan Lewis. So it's like, I look at the Jaguars and I think it really comes down to kind of management and coaching this year. I think that, sure, your O-line is kind of not really battle tested, but it's I kind of look to what they need. And I mean, they say they need a wide receiver. Perhaps you do go after, I'm actually going to say that they do go McMillan, even though it's like, I guess his average draft position is higher, but it's like, how do you pass on a guy like this, that falls to 5, who could go at 4? I don't think he goes at 3 or 2, or obviously not 1 or anything like that, but 5. I'm going to say they grab this guy. And you got kind of their big bodied guy, as well as, your speedster and Brian Thomas. Moving on to round 2, to me, you kind of want to look to, your weapons. I guess one thing I didn't really comment too much on is their tight ends. Obviously, they got rid of, Evan Ingram. He apparently didn't fit their scheme, I guess. But it's like you have Brennan Strange as your top tight end. Johnny Munt from Minnesota is a backup. And then Hunter Long, who I think has promise, but a lot of unprovens here. Excuse me. So it's like, would a tight end be a good thing to grab? I think so, but I honestly don't know what they wanted at tight end. They don't seem to really want or value a wide receiver type of tight end, and it's like, it's weird to me that they have defensive interior here. To me, you look at the positions that they need tackle, guard, and then like wide receiver, like we addressed. So it's like, looking here, I'm going to look at inside O line. You have a decent center, nothing really here. Then tackle, the next highest is Ursery, who I think is good, but would be good value, but later in the draft. So it's like, what do you go with here? I think the Jaguars are one of those prime candidates that maybe they're going to trade down unless they want to go cornerback, which I could see them doing. Trey Amos, maybe. Run defense is good. Man coverage is good. Played for Ole Miss. Has good size. Brings good experience as well. To me, I think that, this is a guy that, you could definitely, draft. And from what I've noticed in this draft and looking at and doing mocks the last few days, is that the cornerbacks, while they might not be bad later in the draft, they look like they've had injuries and they didn't play every game. So maybe that's a position of need early, that they say that they need, it was a need. Now moving on to round 3, now I think you kind of look to, tackles and that sort of thing. We've got Trapillo. Let me take a look at him quick. Shades of Walker Little, tall, lengthy. So it's, I think that he can, be a swing tackle at worst, and he could be a solid starter for any run scheme. I think this is a team that could have a very good run scheme, and I think that that's kind of what they're going for. So I'm going to have them draft Trapillo here because their O-line was iffy. And then we go, to this pick at 88. We have a safety available, Kevin Winston Jr. I have yet to look at this man. So it's like last year he didn't play in as much. Might be the reason why he slides, because it looks like in 2023 he honestly, with this kind of grade, might have been the best safety. And it's like defensive snaps 506, good amount of tackles, assisted tackles, and played a good amount. So it's like, maybe he is one of these guys that, obviously he played in the slot, he played box, he played deep, can seemingly do a lot of different things, so maybe the Jaguars take a chance on this guy. Run defense grade, missed tackles a little bit of an issue, but perhaps they have a guy like this who they grab and can play deep. I know you have Darnell Savage, who's a high speed guy, but just overall, I think that you want to have safety depth. looking now to this pick, I'm kind of looking at these guys that are around this rank. We do have Harold Fanning Jr. Let me take a look at him going to Bowling Green. Oh, very high grade. Interesting. Run block grade very high. Maybe this is their guy. 6'4", 230. It's kind of crazy to me that he would be a good run blocker. But Strawn, tight end 2 is a wing back on the offense, but it's like I feel like they would have a tight end 1 in a heavy run formation. And it's like overall it looks like this guy's not is down to get gritty, and it's not always about size. So it's like I'm actually going to say that they draft this guy, a powerful, strong tight end. Now looking here, what do you kind of look for? I feel like, this is a team that kind of needs linebacker as well. And what linebackers do we have? Available? We have Barrett Carter from Clemson, big school, undersized, unfortunately. Jack Kaiser, about 10 ranks behind, who had a better 2023 than 2024, is somewhat old, I guess, and that sort of thing. But it's like, did a good amount of tackles, only 5 out of, 75 potential of 80. That's not a huge number, obviously. But it's like has a good run defense grade. I guess, and his coverage grade could be better, but it's like also brings a pass rush grade. So it's like, maybe you grab a guy like this to help your pass rush that was, off and on last year. Going on to this, I think that right now, us taking a tackle, one tackle, maybe you need another lineman, to be honest with you. I know it's not the flashiest thing, but, looking at tackle, or even, I guess, we'll do inside O-line as well. Obviously Cornelius is a little bit behind, in terms here. Had a really good 2022 where he didn't even play, all the games, but still over these last 2 years played every single game and eclipsed near 1,000 snaps. And, only let up 3 snaps between, what is that, 1,800 snaps, and only 22, I guess 32 hurries over that course. So it's like, this is a guy that looks like he's tremendous value at this point, so I'm going to take him. Moving on to round 6, we have not really guys, I guess, that, you would think about taking here. Perhaps you do take a center, not knowing if this is going to, the center is going to work out. And this is a guy, I guess, that only played center this last year, but played quite a bit and was average. Obviously, a guy who's a good size, and, perhaps, you could unlock this guy's talent as he's only been a center for a year. I'm actually going to say you go with him. He obviously hasn't played a lot of guard either, but if you can play center, I feel like you can play guard as well, and this guy can clearly move around. Moving on to pick 194. We've already taken a tight end. I see one up here. I'm kind of thinking, with the last 2 picks, it's like, what would we take for this team? I actually really think that, maybe they take another wide receiver here. You can never have too many. So we have Thornton Jr. Contested catch rate is actually off the charts. That's kind of insane. He's 6'5", 215, so a little bit smaller than, what Megatron, was. Megatron was like a 6'5", 2, I think they sometimes list him at 240, but I think he was like 230, type of wide receiver. And we all know what a freak he was. So it's like looking at this guy, not a crazy amount of yards, but, he played for Tennessee, who's not a major school. Did play, somewhat bad against, some top talent, Ohio, Georgia. Gators was probably his best game, but he did have some good games in here. So it's like maybe you try to unlock this guy, and it's like he gives you another kind of big body. Because I think you look at the team, and it's like if you have two big bodies that can like perform, and then you have, Thomas, you're set, eventually in a couple of years. But with the final pick for the Jaguars, what am I thinking? I'm kind of thinking we go with the best available. I'm actually kind of looking at this, and I kind of like Cam Horsley. I've mocked him to a couple different teams now, I think, at this point. But it's like if you need defensive interior, like it says, let's go with this guy. We did draft a safety already. I would lean that way if we didn't have it, but it's like if they really need one, draft Horsley. Solid depth piece at worst. But this is the draft. Let's see what they kind of said. Trey Amos, and then there's Derek Harmon, defensive interior. A better need? I mean, maybe. I think that cornerback is kind of testy with this year just because you have these guys, like I said, that they didn't play every game this season. But overall, this is my Jaguars draft. I'm sorry kind of for the lack of energy. I was painting the house all day and then at a birthday party, but this is obviously a football channel, and I appreciate you guys for watching. And as always, go Pack Go.